Okay, so have you ever, just sat there thinking about monogamy? Like, if it's really, I don't know, just natural for us as humans.
Yeah.
You see it everywhere, right? Like, this is how it should be. But then you see all the, the infidelity, the divorce, all the different ways people are, doing relationships these days. And it kind of makes you wonder, right?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, you look at the numbers and it certainly paints a complicated picture, doesn't it?
It does, for sure. And to get into that, we've been checking out this article from Psychology Today called "Is Monogamy Natural?" It's
Hmm.
by Dr. Lawrence Josephs.
Yeah.
And it dives into this whole evolutionary psychology thing,
Right.
which is really fascinating when you're trying to figure out, why we do the things we do in relationships.
Right, exactly. Like the root of it all.
Yeah. So basically what we're trying to do today is help you guys listening unpack this evolutionary angle on monogamy.
Hmm.
Is this lifelong one-person thing just a social construct,
Mm.
something we've kind of made up, or is there something deeper going on, like biologically?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Huge question. And I guess to start, maybe we should just look at how monogamy actually plays out for people.
Yeah, good point. I mean, right off the bat, one thing that's clear is that a lot of people have trouble with monogamous relationships. We all know about the high rates of infidelity and divorce, like it's everywhere. But on top of that, you've got more and more folks who aren't even aiming for that whole lifelong monogamy thing to begin with.
Right. And it's not just about relationships ending either, right? Like the article talks about people who stay in these relationships for years and years, but they're miserable.
Mm.
They feel stuck, sexually frustrated, wanting something different. It makes you wonder if this idea of happily ever after with one person is more of a fantasy than reality for a lot of people. What do you think?
I think it definitely raises some questions about whether the way we view monogamy, in our culture matches up with what's actually going on inside us. What we're naturally drawn to. The author even says that for a lot of people, lifelong romantic monogamy might just be wishful thinking, or maybe it only works out for a lucky few.
Right, right, right. And that kind of pushes us to look beyond, just what we see around us and think about,
Yeah,
bigger patterns of human behavior in different cultures, different times in history.
absolutely.
Uh,
Because when you zoom out like that, it becomes pretty obvious that our Western obsession with strict monogamy isn't the only way humans have done relationships throughout history.
yeah, for sure. So, I mean, historically and even now, in some places, you've got legal polygamy where people can have multiple spouses. And then there's prostitution, which has existed in so many societies, which tells us that sexual exclusivity hasn't always been the main thing people focus on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting too, even in the Hebrew Bible, you have stories of these patriarchs and kings with multiple wives and concubines. And that was totally normal back then in those ancient Middle Eastern cultures. And you've got the Mormons, right? Early Mormon communities practiced polygamy and saw it as carrying on these Old Testament traditions. So it's when you look at the big picture, it's way more diverse than just this monogamy focus we have today.
100%. And that's where this evolutionary psychology thing comes in. It's super helpful for understanding all this. It goes beyond just looking at all the different cultural stuff and tries to find universal patterns in how humans act to get at what makes us tick. And one of those universals the article talks about is fatherhood.
Okay, fatherhood.
Mm.
This is where it gets interesting, guys.
Mm-hmm.
So the article says that in every culture we know about, men have been involved in fathering their children in some way. Obviously, the level of involvement is all over the place, and sadly, some guys just don't step up at all. But the basic idea of recognizing and caring for your kids seems to be a constant in human societies.
Yeah.
So, why is that such a big deal from an evolutionary standpoint?
Well, when you compare that to the rest of the animal kingdom, it starts to make sense. Mothering is pretty much universal among mammals, right? It's got to happen for babies to survive. But being an active father, that's actually pretty rare among mammals. It's way more common in birds, where the males often help build nests, sit on the eggs, and even feed the chicks.
And the article makes this really cool connection between that fathering thing in birds and how they mate, which is often monogamous, right? At least for one breeding season anyway.
Mhm.
So how does that relate to us?
Exactly. That's the key point. The article highlights that with birds, this active dad behavior is almost always found in species that do this monogamous pair bonding thing, even if it's just for that one breeding cycle. And when you look at all these different species side by side, it really suggests that there's a basic link.
Oh, wow.
Fatherhood kind of goes hand in hand with evolving monogamy.
That's so cool. So what's the logic behind that? From an evolutionary perspective, why would those two things be so connected?
It basically comes down to this idea called paternity certainty. It's for a male to really invest time and energy in raising kids, he's got to be pretty sure those kids are actually his right. Monogamy, especially from the female side, gives him that extra confidence. It makes it more likely that he's putting his effort into his own genetic line.
Okay, that makes sense from the guy's point of view, like making sure his genes get passed down. But what's in it for the women? Like, why would they be into this monogamy thing from an evolutionary angle?
The article says there's a big payoff for them, too. If females are mostly monogamous, it makes it way more likely that the males will stick around and help raise the kids.
Right.
And that leads to what's called biparental care, which is basically both parents actively raising their young people. And that would have been huge for survival, especially way back when. Humans take a long time to grow up and be independent, so having two parents around to help would have made a huge difference.
So this whole thing about monogamy and biparental care evolving together, driven by guys wanting to be sure about being the father and women wanting help raising kids, that's basically the core of the argument for humans being naturally inclined towards monogamy, right?
Yeah.
Like from an evolutionary standpoint. Yeah.
That's the main idea, yeah. Based on the fact that fatherhood and both parents raising kids is so common across human cultures, it really points to us having this innate tendency towards monogamy. Like this basic urge to form these exclusive romantic bonds to have kids and raise them together.
But hold on. If this tendency is so strong, why do we see so much cheating, so much unhappiness in monogamous relationships? Why doesn't this innate tendency just automatically make everyone have these awesome lifelong partnerships?
That's a great question. And the article talks about this too. It's really important to get at that even though we might have these evolved tendencies towards monogamy, that doesn't just magically erase all these other evolutionary drives we have, like the desire for genetic diversity, maybe wanting to mate with someone who has better genes, or even just wanting access to more resources. These are all evolutionary things too, and they can totally exist alongside that urge to pair bond.
So it's like we've got all these different evolutionary forces inside us kind of pulling us in different directions when it comes to relationships.
Exactly. And the article goes on to say that even if someone really wants a monogamous relationship and feels drawn to it, that doesn't mean they automatically have the right personality or the skills to make it work long term.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Right? Like things like being secure in your attachment style, being able to empathize, communicate well, all that stuff.
Yeah.
The article mentions those as super important for having a good monogamous relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are even people the article calls failed monogamists. These are folks who really want that lifelong, happy monogamous thing, but they just can't seem to make it work. Maybe they don't have the right skills for it, or their personality makes it harder for them to be exclusive. It's tough.
So from an evolutionary angle, it seems like this tendency towards monogamy is all about finding a balance between the good stuff about pair bonding to raise kids and the potential benefits of doing things that aren't monogamous in other situations, right?
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. It highlights that evolution has given us this whole complicated set of desires and urges, not just this simple program for lifelong monogamy.
Right. And the article also mentions that for people who find monogamy really hard or who just want different things from their relationships, consensual non-monogamy is another option.
Mhm.
But even that takes a certain set of skills, like being able to handle jealousy and having tons of open communication and trust.
Totally. And at the end of the day, the article suggests that if you're someone who really wants monogamy but struggles with it, it's crucial to be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Understanding how complicated our evolved nature is and how many different desires humans have is key to figuring out relationships in a healthy way.
So to wrap up this deep dive, what we've learned from evolutionary psychology based on this article is that there's probably a natural tendency for humans towards monogamy. It's likely tied to how fatherhood and both parents raising kids have been so successful for our species evolutionarily. This probably developed because men wanted to be sure they were the father and women wanted the security of having shared resources and help with childcare. But having this tendency doesn't mean we don't also have desires that aren't monogamous. And it doesn't guarantee that monogamous relationships will work out.
Yeah.
Those are influenced by our individual personalities and how good we are at relationships.
Exactly. And I think what's really cool here is understanding how all that deep down biological stuff interacts with our individual psychology, and the social environments we're in. That's what shapes all the different experiences people have with relationships.
Yeah, totally. So here's something for you guys listening to think about. How do all these insights we've been talking about, even the unconscious evolutionary stuff, how does that all play into your own views and experiences with relationships? How do these ideas help you understand modern relationships and all the different paths people choose when it comes to intimacy and connection?
It really makes you think about how we balance our evolved biology with how complicated modern life is and how many different relationship styles are becoming more visible and accepted these days.
Lots to ponder for sure.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Don't forget to click like and subscribe to the Unlock Your Mind channel.